there was another topic that I was going to bring up. We've had such good discussion today, and I think we were rapidly running out of time. But the topic that I was going to bring up at the earlier on was the idea of welfare as an investment in society. Um, and the whole reason why this got brought up was that I was I was discussing with my wife that you know what happens when the financial system completely breaks down totally to the point where you have everybody in a state of total desperation that you you run out of where the extremely wealthy don't have somebody that's willing to harvest food or clean or maintain the infrastructure and the roads and the electricity and stuff. What happens when all of that just goes away, when money stops meaning things? And what came out of that discussion was that social welfare is an investment. And I guess it was an interesting way to think about it that I hadn't really considered until I went back and thought of President Roosevelt, Theodore Roosevelt. Um, Probably one of, if not the greatest president that we had in the United States. Incredibly intelligent man, a war hero, um, from the Spanish American War, and honestly, I think things would have gone very differently if he had been president during the First World War. But the way that he looked at society is that if you care for the common good of everybody, then everybody can focus on the common good of the nation. So one of his biggest priorities for the United States average citizen was setting up social programs, and that was one of his biggest benefits as a president, was that people loved him so much, not just because he was a war hero, but because he established some of the beginnings of social welfare that ensured that people had a way to survive if economic hardship ever came for the United States. And coincidentally, it did during the Great Depression only 2 decades later. And it was because of Theodore Roosevelt's preparation that the nation was able to absorb the shock, even as poorly as it did, without his preparation in social welfare programs and without establishing that precedence and that mindset for the average person to be well taken care of. It would have likely led to the total collapse of society in the United States, because people were starving even as bad as it was, even with the soup kitchens. But without Theodore Roosevelt, there would have been no soup kitchens. You get my point. It would have been Victorian style poverty and squalor in the United States throughout the just after the Roaring Twenties, which was the highlight of the century as America's golden age at the time, because everybody had everything, instant access to the greatest luxuries and pleasures that anyone could have hoped to experience. And of course, that led to other problems like hyperinflation of the dollar, and there was a serious loss of there was a serious disconnection, I should say, between economic stability and people's expectations of what the dollar and what America could do as an economic power. But I was just wondering how everybody else felt about it, because the narrative that I've seen from like the GOP has consistently been like, if you raise the minimum wage by $1, it's going to cause the entire it's going to cause like industries to fall apart and companies will go bankrupt overnight. Like they'll just say like raising minimum wage will cause total Armageddon. Um, and I look at the wage gap between average people and like CEOs of companies, and I just see that executives are taking all of the profit that are being generated by people on the ground floor who are doing the hands-on work.
You're absolutely right. In fact, that's what FDR said. FDR used to be incredulous. He used to go, "I'm saving their system," talking about the wealthy and Republicans, and they're fighting over scraps. It's the same argument you're presenting. The same thing FDR said.
Yeah, yeah.
So
FDR was
you're being consistent there. I don't know if he was in the Spanish American War. I believe that was his cousin Teddy Roosevelt.
Teddy Roosevelt was in the Spanish. I was speaking of Teddy Roosevelt. He started the social welfare programs early on before he formed the Bull Moose Party and lost the election of 1914. I think it was 1914. Um, but yeah,
Yeah, he did
FDR
start. You're right.
also FDR also he continued on that work of forming more social welfare programs and then got us through World War II as well. But yeah, he brought us out of the Great Depression with the Brand New Deal Act, the Housing Deal Act that ensured average Americans
He,
access to government securitized loans for mortgages.
yeah, he was actually trying to get like Obamacare style health care also, but he knew the country wasn't ready for it. But he was trying to work on legislation for that.
Yeah,
So he foresaw what was happening. He realized what was happening. And you're right. I think you said, if I recall, I think you said he was the best president we had. Did I hear you correctly, or was it Teddy Roosevelt?
I was
That you
saying
were?
Teddy Roosevelt. FDR was never in the. He was never a general or anything like that. But I would say he's
Oh
a
yeah,
very also a really good one. Both of the Roosevelts were fantastic presidents. That
yeah. Ironically, in different parties, but trying to achieve the same thing.
yeah, yeah. Oddly enough, I think that I do think that Theodore Roosevelt was part of his. The Republican Party was very different then than after the Great Depression. Um, the Republican Party, the Republican Party more resembled the Republican Party in the post Civil War antebellum era, which was actually quite liberal, which a lot of people don't realize. The Republican Party during the Civil War actually were the ones that fought for
Yeah,
the anti slavery law and the right for all Americans to vote. They still only allowed men to vote. But later on, they also carried on the Women's Suffrage Act, which brought in women being able to vote as well in the early 1900s. Before I think it was it 1910, 1912, something like that. It was right around Prohibition.
suffrage. Women's suffrage was 1920, I believe.
That was 1920. Okay, so I'm way off. It was right there in the beginning of the Roaring Twenties.
Yeah,
I'm thinking I'm confusing women's suffrage with Prohibition, which was
that was around
also
the same time.
around the same time.
I think that was 1919 or something. Almost right after the war, but I can't remember. But it was right around then. But
Yeah. Well, anyway, the two presidents between Theodore Roosevelt and FDR, they both had very different parties, but very similar ideas of what America should look like in the wake of the crisis, the repeated crises that it was facing, back to back to back. The conflict with the Spanish, I think that that really did shape Theodore Roosevelt's idea of how to lead people and how to lead by example and recognizing of the needs of the individual is what contributes to the success of the group. And his leadership of soldiers showed up in his leadership of the nation, where he ensured that individuals were cared for. Anyway, the point of it all was that I was getting to was that both presidents had an idea of what America should look like in a going out of each of these crises that it had to face. And um, between those two presidents, they pretty much single handedly had showed up for the American public in order to craft a system that was at least fair enough that average people wouldn't be totally abandoned and left in squalor if there was an economic depression. Theodore Roosevelt set up the initial work, but Franklin Roosevelt certainly carried it forward to the end.
Oh, but the main point is you're absolutely right in that it serves the wealthy themselves to basically make sure that there's redistribution. I mean, you've got a system, and no matter what anybody says, and I'm a capitalist, but there are major issues in that with capitalism, the wealth tends to get concentrated. You need to constantly redistribute.
Yeah.
Otherwise, you're going to have a very similar to Animal Farm.
Yeah. Oh God, that's a terrifying book. But yeah, there's a lot of parallels that can be drawn there as well. I was going to pull up a chart on the gap, the income gap between executives and workers.
They just simply have lost their way. It's
the average gap is 670 to 1. Up from 604 to 1 in the prior year. So for every dollar the CEO makes, or for every dollar that the worker makes, the CEO gets 670. That's stupid. It's fucking insane.
Yeah, I mean it's.
Let's translate that to a. We'll just go with median income. Median household income is $48,000 per year, roughly. Multiply that 670, and you get $32,160,000. So that's the average CEO pay annualized when you stack it up against the median household income of the average worker. That's quite sad.
It's insanity. Sad. We're operating at insane levels.
And that's just flat pay. And people wonder why the rich only get richer. Well, these guys don't need that much money. They only need like the first 2 million to live on, and they're totally fine. The other 30 goes into investment trusts, and they go and grow that money because they have it to grow. And nobody else can do that. Everybody else on the bottom rung of society, all of their pay, 100% of it gets used because it's what they need to live. And it's only the bare minimum for what they have to subsist on. And the poverty, oh God, the other thing that I was looking at was the difference in the poverty rate. We're up to 11.6, 11.4. Well, it's either 11.4 or 11.6% today.
Pretty sick.
It is.
And I'm totally for redistribution. That doesn't mean you're not a capitalist. It just means you want the system to survive. It won't survive if you have enough people. When they get to the point where they say, I'm better off dead, or trying to change the system violently.
Yeah,
I don't care.
That's what happens. And what frustrates me is hearing the counter argument of everybody that's in well, not everybody, but like the more extreme opinions in the GOP that seems to dominate the narrative and gets all the attention on the news is, well, if they come for what I want, I'm just going to shoot them. Like that's the idea of castle doctrine of just, if anybody comes for me and mine, I'm going to take them out. And that's the way America should be. I'm like, that's not the way any society should be. That's stupid. That's the same way it is. That's the same way it's been in the Middle East.
Though.
Go ahead.
Even if they were to attempt to exercise that plan, what happens when they run out of bullets? There can be a point where there could be so many starving, desperate people that you won't have enough of those bullets that they said they're going to shoot them with to keep the people at bay, and they will just be overrun. And I think a lot of people don't realize, like I was saying, it doesn't matter how you feel about your neighbor. It doesn't matter if you love them or hate them. You don't want the people who live next door or down the road from you to be starving and desperate. It doesn't matter if it's unfair that they get free stuff. You don't want 1,000 of your neighbors hungry and desperate. It's not in your best interest.
Absolutely. I mean, and what kind of life would that be anyway? I mean, imagine being on guard 24 hours a day, and that's all you'd be able to do.
Exactly.
Right?
Like, you don't get to go back to work and just live normally after that. When things get that bad, it gets bad societally. Like,
Right.
everywhere gets that
And
bad.
you couldn't trust a worker, right? You can't trust like to hire a domestic worker because they probably try to kill you in your sleep. You're not living like this. I don't even know how you do it. Like a secured, like closed, panic room. You have to operate out of a panic room, which you then depend on technicians if it broke. And the whole thing, it just would be, your life would be living hell once it gets there, even if you survive it, even if you're not, once
Yeah.
you know that there's a target on your back, like a mass, from a massive crowd, your life has changed anyway. I mean, I guess they're building these bunkers to live underground. That's what the wealthy are doing, from what I've read. But
Yeah, well, you know what? They're welcome to it. Fuck them. Go underground. Go hide in the
but you
dirt.
can't
Fuck
get
you.
help, right?
Get
You
the fuck
can't
out
get
of our
help.
lives. Get the fuck out of our society, because you're nothing but a parasite that's siphoning off the one thing that keeps things functional in the form of currency, which is stupid anyway. But since this is the society and the system that we live in, we need to recognize that the problem is all related to this parasitic relationship that Wall Street and the elite have with the rest of society, where their entire mindset and their entire way of life is to just get money, get more, get the highest. It's like the highest score when you die is how much money you have in your fucking bank
It's
account.
a sport. It's a sport. It's not even like you said. It's not necessary now. It becomes a sport. Power corrupts, and absolute power corrupts absolutely, and that's what you're seeing play out. I mean, I hate to say it, but that old adage is still the way it is.
And it makes no sense. It's just
I think they're
leading to
bored
collapse.
too. So what when you won the game, like when you play a video game or even if you use a cheat code and you have infinite money, what do you start to do? You start to fuck with shit. And I think that's what they're doing with us now. It's all just a big game to them and we're just their little toys. They don't even care about the money
Yeah,
anymore.
that's what I'm saying. It's exactly it. It's no longer relevant, right? They don't need it to live. How many Lamborghinis can they buy? How many jets, yachts? How about what's his face from Jeff Bezos with that stupid with that incredible yacht that needs a yacht?
I love the fact that it got
how
stuck. It was so
obnoxious
big
is
that it
that?
got fucking stuck.
Yeah, but that's how obnoxious. But that's how obnoxious is that, right? A yacht that needs a yacht. I mean, what's that sound like you said? That's like Les Miserables, right? It's kind of like that, right? It's like in the face of people who are stacking up five to a one bedroom apartment, right? All working at McDonald's or Chick-fil-A or something, barely making it, and to read about something like that, a yacht that needs a yacht to tow it or something. A kid doesn't get any more obnoxious and in your face than that, in my opinion.
It doesn't make any kind of sense. And I'm not saying that like we need to just like seize every asset and leave these guys with nothing, but like for fuck's sake,
No,
is
no
there
one's
any
saying
reason
that.
by any one single person to have $1 trillion in their fucking net worth? There's no reason. Even the government is so fucking frivolous with how they've spent everything that they use us like a fucking bank account that's endless. But we are not. We do not, this well has run dry. There's not enough
Yeah,
people that are making enough money that are educated enough and wealthy enough to prop up the entirety of our government and its operations, along with all of the corporate bribes that are being issued out to make all of these big mega companies even more profitable by injecting money supply and incentives and subsidies and bullshit through legislation to make sure that they're winning and we're losing. We've run out. Okay, we've run out, and people are going to
yeah.
stop giving a shit. And we're very very rapidly getting to that point where we have to decide: is it worth it to continue this fucking charade? Should we all just do the big violent reset now? Are we getting there? How close are we?
That probably won't happen until there's a massive depression, and then it will happen.
Then it probably will happen. But the thing is that this is going when that happens, the first thing that's going to be on people's shit list is their neighbors. And that's the point of this entire conversation. Just like Persephone was saying, that individuals that are surrounded in poverty and they're the only ones who are doing well, they just became the target. Okay? Because you have food, you have electricity, you have fuel, you have what they need that nobody else around you has. And that's not in your interest. So the attitude of turning down social welfare programs because, well, they didn't work hard enough to deserve it. I worked hard for what I want. And I see this argument coming from people who even I respect, like Michael Bordenaro said this in a video that he thinks that it's stupid that students are getting this free money from the government when he made the decision not to go to college and he became a successful entrepreneur on his own right, which that's fine. Like, congratulations, dude. That's good for you, but you have the wrong attitude about it. And I respect the guy for his opinion and his success as a businessman, but that opinion is toxic in my opinion, because I came from the other side of it, where I was one of the haves surrounded by the have-nots, and I'm watching all of my friends that I'm watching all of them suffer and struggle through life, barely able to afford to eat, barely able to afford their bills. And I just happened to land in a job that I happen to be good at, that I like and I enjoy and is profitable. And I'm one of those few guys that got really, really lucky. But I'm surrounded and watching this suffering around me because all of my friends, they went into a trade. They went into HVAC or plumbing or electricians, car
They should have
mechanics and stuff.
they should have been able to make that okay if they were good. Actually, they're in demand somewhat.
Yeah, I mean the trades are in demand and they're doing all right. A lot of them are doing all right, but then some of them aren't. And there's a lot of them. There's a lot of people out there that just aren't, and they're getting hit
How
one
about the
two
ones that
punch
aren't in trades?
every
Like
day.
that's what you're not seeing. So you're not seeing that. We're not seeing what the people who when we go to Chick-fil-A, what do they do when they go home? We're not like spending a day or a week or a month in their lives to see what they're really going through. We
Yeah,
don't see it.
yeah,
And that's the ones you want to talk about who's suffering, the ones who don't have any type of skilled labor jobs.
yeah. And it's our own fault because we've abandoned the idea of a functional educational system because we've gutted it
Yeah.
so many times. And I
Yes.
fully blame the Republican Party for this because they're the only
But it's
ones
not
who
just the
keep cutting
gutting
it.
TD, but it also look at the cost of college. It went up. It was inflation adjusted 4 times
That
in what
too.
20,
Yeah.
30 years.
Yeah. For-profit
That is the main.
colleges, I
That
agree.
is the problem. Almost more than anything else is that, in
I
my opinion.
I absolutely agree. This is the reason, and that's exactly the reason why I'm a big fan of Bernie Sanders, which you can have your own stance about him, but as far as education is concerned and his idea of how education needs to be restructured to make it free and available for people, maybe not like I'm not talking about making
Right. No, he's
Stanford and
right.
Oxford and well, not Oxford, that's UK, but like Stanford
No.
and Harvard just free access to everybody.
Our Ivy
No.
League. You're
Yeah.
not talking about our
Yeah,
tier,
I'm
our
not
top
talking
tier.
about Ivy League tier schools. I'm talking about like making community college something that's accessible to everybody so that at the very least somebody can get a career. Somebody can go into a trade because you need people to keep the country functional for fuck's sake. Like, why are we burying all these people in debt in like 60, 80, $100,000 of debt into when they're going into a field that it's only going to pay them between like maybe 15 to $25 an hour. The really good ones might get up to $40 an hour on the high side, like after they're
Yeah, it
really
depends.
late into
Yeah,
their
it depends.
career, or if they go into the business for themselves and they take that risk, but they're making it
Yeah.
so
It's a
unattainable.
racket. It's a racket, and I don't know why that is. And I mean, obviously a strong lobby somehow, right? But there's something clearly wrong. That I think that stands out. That and healthcare probably are the two biggest. Not that home prices, that's a phenomenon of abnormal with that lack of supply, because of the coronavirus. But healthcare and education are two that basically, there's no explanation for why they continue to go up far greater than the pace of inflation.
Yeah,
It's insane.
yeah. It it,
You
it
want to
It's
hear
insane.
something that'll
You can
really
get
grind your
bankrupted.
gears?
I'm sorry. Sorry.
You want to hear something that'll really grind your gears? Almost $17 trillion of government debt is actually owed to the people. Like 10 generations after we're gone, we'll never see that money back. But the way our money's smart.
This
Probably true.
this has to change. Like if we don't do something now, then it's going to lead not just to the collapse of the United States, but it's going to go across the globe. We're already starting to see the effects of this mindset. It's been a toxic mindset across the entire world.